we are witnessing the morbid symptoms of a collapsing regime.
Very trapped in our post-totalitarian heritage.
In our countries, at different levels, of course, there is no real competition between the political actors.
Watch your mouth. In today's conversation, journalists from Russia, Turkey, and Hungary discuss how they deal with political pressure, how they can adapt their professional practices, and why they don't want to identify with the trope of the exile, on the program of the 31st European Meeting of Cultural Journals. This discussion was pre-recorded, but the panelists also joined us after the first part to react in real time to the questions and comments asked by our live audience during the screening in the comments section and on the spot by in-person participants. György Kerényi is a senior correspondent at Radio Free Europe Hungary. He founded and co-founded 7 different media outlets, including the Roma radio channel Radio C, 2 prison radio studios, and most recently the print daily Pesti Hírlap. Kerényi was editor-in-chief of the Hungarian public broadcast MR1 Kossuth Radio until 2010, and later worked as a program director of Patria Radio, the Hungarian channel of the Slovak public radio. He was a lecturer for a decade at Eurozine's partner ELTE Media, the Media and Communication Studies department at ELTE University in Budapest. Irina Borogan is a Russian investigative journalist, tuning in from London in the United Kingdom, co-founder and deputy editor of Agentura.ru, a watchdog of the Russian Secret Service's activities. She has covered the intelligence services, terrorist attacks, and war conflicts in Russia and across the globe. She is currently a visiting fellow at the King's College Russia Institute. Her books include The New Nobility, Russia's Security State and the Enduring Legacy of the KGB, and The Compatriots, the brutal and chaotic history of Russia's exiles, émigrés, and agents abroad. Ece Temelkuran is an award-winning Turkish novelist and political commentator based in Zagreb, Croatia. Her journalism has appeared in The Guardian, The New York Times, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and Der Spiegel. She is the author of the internationally acclaimed book How to Lose a Country: 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship. Her latest book is Together: 10 Choices for a Better Now. I'd like to start with Irina. If you are from Moscow, you have lived more or less all your life in Moscow, although you have been living outside of Russia for a couple of months here and there. We actually have a connection via Eurozine with you from Vienna. But you are now in London and you are not sure, or you probably won't be able to relocate back into Moscow in the current situation. I know it's painful and it's not great to swim around in this, but why don't you tell us about what you're facing now and how that influences your work?
Thank you for having me here. This is really not easy to find out yourself in a situation when you are abroad and you have been living for your whole life in the country. For me, it's Russia. And you have been working for Russian and Western media, and you have been and you published 3 books in Russia. And I don't know, you know that situation in Russia was dangerous for a while. But until August last year, I didn't have an idea to get out of the country. But because we got me and my partner and also co-author Andrei Soldatov, because we got some threats and warnings from the authorities, we decided to get out for a while outside the country. I have to explain that we set up our website Agentura.ru, which is about security services, 20 years ago. And since then, we have been publishing a lot of investigations on the security services, including our book, The New Nobility, which is about the FSB, the Russian counterintelligence service, and the most dangerous service in the country. Our website, Agentura.ru, it had a media license and we operated as a media. But suddenly, last year, we learned that our license of our media, Agentura.ru, was cancelled. Andrei, who is the chief editor-in-chief of the website, decided to check what's happened, because it's very rare thing when the license can be cancelled silently, because usually it's a big deal. The government agencies send you warnings, send you special letters that you broke the law and something like that, and only after that you can be stripped of your license. So Andrei went on their websites and decided to check what's going on, and he found out that our license was cancelled because physical person has died, and physical persons who has obtained the license is Andrei. It was clear sign that we have to do something, and we got a fellowship at King's College, and now we are visiting fellows at King's College in London. COVID era started a year ago. The way we journalists gathering information has changed, and we can gather more information online. Of course, it's not the ideal position, because still you need to meet your sources, you need to gather information personally, you have to meet people physically, you have to influence on them, you have to understand what's going on, and you have to be on the site of events. But in some way, it's getting easier and easier to talk with people on sensitive issues via the internet. So I try to continue my job and my work, and we just recently we have updated our information on the FSB, which is the major Russian secret service, and we posted a lot of new information on the service. We got this from our sources, from open sources, from everywhere. So we're not gonna stop.
I see. György Kerényi, Hungary, Turkey, and Russia are three very different play fields. We are not going to act like they were the same, but you are all faced with some kind of, well, more or less obvious repression and a lot of sort of administrative obstacles, quite like Irina just explained, withdrawing licenses through loopholes or whatever, or posing economic obstacles or whatnot. You have been responsible, you have set up a whole bunch of and very different types of media. You have tried your hand in many of them and have been successful. Now you're once again working as a journalist, not as an editor currently, but you say that you experience that this encapsulation, which you sense, does change the work. I believe you use the expression that it's actually journalists who are captured in a bubble. How do you sense this? What do you make of this? How does it affect your work? Or how do you go outside of this bubble, if you can?
Our regime is much less repressive than yours. So the influence is mostly coming from the media ownership. And I think that one of biggest role disorder now is that we are trained and socialized for balancing between different important opinions in the society. So for being impartial, but the situation in our country doesn't let anybody stand in the middle. So as the spin doctors say, in the middle of the road, there is the dead cat only. So we have to say and work under this aim that our authoritarian leaders have to go. That's what is our conclusion should be. But the journalist ethics is not to be the part of the political struggles, but to report it. So we are trained for a competition in which we do not choose a side, but in our countries at different levels, of course, there is no real competition between the political actors. So that is the role disorder in our work. What I feel that we have to choose a side, and we are not socialized for this. So it's quiet. It looks like the situation before the transition, but we had 30 years now after the transition, and this socializing has got some conflict now. That's what I feel a lot of times.
By transition, I'm assuming you mean 1989,
and
90.
So before that,
Yeah.
it was true. There is a repressive power, and in the other side there is the society who's living repression. But in the last 30 years, that's why it's really different from your countries. We socialized for another role model. So we got the West European liberal democracies, checks and balances, roles, and it doesn't work very well in this situation. That's what I feel.
How do you, is there a way for you to overcome this burden? I understand that you identify it in colleagues, that they actually end up choosing sides. They actually end up sort of signing up, possibly not for political parties, although that also happens. Obviously, that always happens in every regime. But even if they don't choose a particular political stance, they do end up positioned as sort of either like freedom fighters or dissidents or exiles, which is also a very problematic term, which Ece will probably want to talk about, or I would like to ask her about. How do you overcome this? Do you have a recipe to sort of avoid this position for yourself? As much as I understand, you don't want to take a stance here.
Unfortunately not. I have no recipe for this, and it's very bad. You know, I was in the last 20 years. I was an editor-in-chief in different mediums since 2010. From the beginning of the Fidesz, the ruling party, big victory, I've seen a lot of journalists in my media outlets, they were led by me, and I think they lost this basic practice that you should ask all the parties. You should ask the government, because you never get answers from the government. And after years, you didn't send the questions anymore, or you publish the article in a real time. So after 2 hours, sending the questions, and in this way, we always use, people who are working in the independent part of the media use each other's opinion bubbles, so our narratives only, and there is no mirror of these narratives, and it's very bad for our work.
It's very sad to hear that, because they look at the Eastern Europe from Russia as a countries that can do better, because you were freed earlier, and dissident movement was stronger than the Soviet Union, and democracy was much more balanced from the beginning, and you didn't have so many oligarchs who can influence on politics. And it's so disappointing to hear that. But I believe that, I still believe that countries like, of course, there are different countries, Poland, Hungary, and Czechia, but I still believe that you can do better. But that's for Russia, where it seems that we are really trapped in our post-totalitarian heritage. Many years ago, I didn't believe that we can change something immediately. In the late 90s, I was sure that there were so many young people who didn't like Soviet Union at all, and who didn't know to follow this experience, and they were some kind of in power. But after Putin came to power, because a lot of bad events happened. There was a Chechen war, there was financial crisis, people got poor and angry at democracy because they connected these two things. And after that, they voted for Putin, or maybe initially he was appointed by President Yeltsin, and then people voted for him, and that was so disappointing, and that was so bad. I remember that feeling, and I can explain this only by the fact that people who grew up in totalitarian country got the totalitarian ideas from their parents, even they were born, even their children still getting these ideas from their parents, and it's coming not like the indirect way that you have to live in the Soviet Union, not seeing pornography or not having access to modern music or something, but it's like you have to have a person in the top of hierarchy who can decide for you, and you are stripped of any kind of responsibility. That's what I see now, and that's bad.
Yeah. I believe that Ece has a very different view of these trajectories. At least I understand that you are usually not this optimistic about established democracies, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your experience being labeled with this very majestic label of the exile, which I believe you reject, you have a strong problem with, and that you also forecast that certain institutions are not quite so stable as people would like to believe?
Thank you, Réka. When Irina was talking, when she mentioned that, this being proclaimed dead situation, I thought of myself and my experience, how I ended up in Zagreb. After 2016, after the coup attempt in Turkey, things got really horrible. It was already an oppressive regime, but then Mr. Erdogan turned the crisis of coup attempt into his biggest opportunity to start to be a proper dictator, actually. And then it was a time like Irina's situation. Our passports were lost suddenly. When people are trying to go out from the country or come into the country, when they present their passports, the passport officer was telling them, your passport is lost. You're there, you're giving your passport, and they say your passport is recorded as lost. So they take your passport, and then you cannot take that passport again. So it was after the 2016, this process began, this so-called lost passports. They were confiscating your passport. So that's why one of the reasons I wanted to get out of the country, because it was, one, unpredictable. You would know nothing about what would happen to you, because it wasn't the rule of law. It was just this impulsive oppressions, tools of oppressions from the power. So one day, actually, I was coming back from London. The passport officer took my passport, and she looked at the passport to me, and then it took so long. And I thought, now it's happening. They're either going to arrest me, or like they're going to take this passport, and I will be locked down in the country. And then she screamed, "Oh, Ece Temelkuran, can we take a selfie with you?" And actually, a police officer took a picture of us together. So I remember half of my face crying, half of my face laughing. And that moment, I thought, I cannot take this anymore. It is not, the most torturous thing is not knowing what will happen. You can be arrested, or you can, pose for a selfie. And, I realized how much fear took over my thinking and my daily life as well. At one point, many of us actually were going to bed with proper pajamas, thinking that at 5 o'clock in the morning they could come. And then I came to Zagreb for a few days, actually, and then I suddenly decided to stay. Since this happened like 5.5 years ago. And the time I spend here is like non-time, and Zagreb feels like non-place, because when, I don't know what Irina would say, but like when you leave the country, you're starting to live in this abstract in-betweenness, sort of. You're not in the country, but you're looking at the country. You're not really a local. You cannot really become a local in the new country. So you're an in-betweenness, actually. But then in this in-betweenness, of course, people ask you what you have been through, and they want you to tell your story and your story only. I have been an international journalist since I told stories in journalism and literature world, and these stories have been from all around the world. I never talked about my story or my country's story in particular. So yeah, but then in your new country and in European countries, they want you to act as if this victim who finally, ran away from the hands of the barbarians and threw herself to the arms of the civilized world and so on. The Europeans, some of them, find this flattering, I think, or reassuring to hear that their continent is still the safe haven for the free thinkers, for the individual freedoms and so on. But then it makes you an exile. Since 5 years, I think, whenever they talk about me, they give this line as the sexiest line in my CV. She's exiled from Turkey and so on. But it is easy for them to pronounce that word, but then it is not easy for people like me to wear that word, because once you wear that word on you, like this costume, you can never get rid of it. Even if you go back to your country, you're an exile. Once an exile, always an exile. So I don't want to carry that weight which doesn't belong to me and which is given to me by the political power. I didn't choose this. So I am trying to see this bit in my life as a part of a bigger journey. I lived in many countries. I lived in Tunisia, I lived in Lebanon, France, Britain. So I know what it is to be away from home, but this is the first time I am experiencing to be obliged to be away from home. But then all this time, I'm like, during those years that I lived in other countries, and especially for the last 5 years, I had almost too much time to think about what a country is. What are we missing, or what are we fighting for when we fight war for? What is that country that makes us suffer so much, and why do we sort of choose to suffer? And I came to think that actually it's a table. A country is a table, and the West entity, the abstract entity that surrounds that table, and that table is full of your loved ones. You actually, missed those people, not the country itself necessarily, and you miss the language and the comfort of not having to explain your jokes. But then I'm not seeing us as victims. And it is unfair to these countries, especially for Russia. 30 years ago, when we go around and ask people, tell the first word that comes to you when we say Russia, say Dostoevsky, Tchaikovsky, Lenin, probably, whatever. But, they would tell other names. And now it feels like in that West land, there is only one person living, and that is Putin. We are represented in the media as exiles or dissidents, so on and so forth, and that makes our existence connected to these dictators, and these dictators do not deserve to be the symbols of our countries. Neither Orban, nor Putin, nor Erdogan can be the face of these countries. It is unjust to think that. So for me now, face of Russia is Irina, and face of Hungary is György. And we have to insist on this, because it feels like they invade too much space and there is no space for us in this picture of our countries. I think we have to show up more to tell that it's not them, it is us who represent our people.
Well, I have always had to explain my jokes, but that's probably because of the quality of my jokes. So that's a different type of experience. But I think I understand what you're referring to. And also, you know, in our conversations, this sort of turns of language that you can never employ anymore in a conversation. I think part of the problem here, and it's going to affect Irina as well, and György has experienced it, I think, probably at least in part when working abroad or working for media not based in Hungary, that the exile has this like thousands of years of literary tradition, which is something that we learn, that's like part of the curriculum. You don't read Ovid, but you learn about Ovid, obviously, right? And you learn about all these famous exiles who sort of display a certain pattern. And that's very easy to identify. It's much harder to identify the similarities with someone that you don't want to be in the same place with. And yet we see it with a lot of media professionals, writers, artists, that when they are displaced, and they are displaced because they want to stick to their profession, they want to stick to their work, so they choose another venue. They do become somehow the voice that is supposed to represent everything else outside of their country, right? You are supposed to represent everything that's not Erdogan or Putin or Orban, or, you know, however we go about this. But that puts an extreme weight on everything that you say. However, that's also the lifeline as a media professional, to talk about your own country, be a correspondent from somewhere.
I have been reading literature on exiles for years, since my childhood. And the worst thing that I published a book on, me and Andrei Soldatov, we published a book on political emigration a year ago, called The Compatriots. It's about Russian political emigration and their complicated relationship with the Kremlin. But I'm still not feeling that I'm in exile. Maybe because I left Russia just eight months ago, so I don't have this sad feeling that I'm an immigrant or I'm an exile. And because I'm working on the new book, I still feel quite optimistic, and I got all materials for the book that I can get. I gathered all information for the book that I could in Russia, and it was the period that I have to find another part of information outside the country in the archives in the United States, in the archives in the United Kingdom, because the topic of the book it's about espionage, and the topic of the books, the heroes, they are present on the both sides, in Russia and on the West. So because of all these circumstances, I don't feel that I don't feel sad, and that I don't feel I'm in exile. I feel bad about what's going on in Russia, because many people was put under criminal investigation, and some of them was sent to prison. That is the worst thing about Russia for me now. So I feel that I have to participate in their life more than I'm doing here.
But that's a special situation, because it can also be read like you did all the gathering of the information and the research, and now you're taking like a writer's retreat. Sort of, that's what a fellowship like this is supposed to do. So that's like a softer landing. And I understand why you don't feel this like sudden impact, but maybe it also has to do with what Ece says, that this experience of the exile from within is very different from what is shown to the outside world, or how the outside world actually understands it. Because there's very little heroism in the everydays. And O'Doherty, in his article titled "The Europeans," cites a writer, we'll add the link here in the show notes, who says that it's lovely that the French colleagues who are surrounding me ask me about how I'm doing and what my hopes are for my country, but nobody ever asks me about whether I have money for lunch. And I understand that this is a very tangible problem, but I think it appears all the time when you face these like very existential and not very intellectual problems. It might just change the view. But György, you are used to jumping borders. You have also worked for Radio Patria, the Hungarian channel of the Slovakian public broadcast. So you have worked in a publicity that's not necessarily the biggest mainstream for Hungarian speakers. I don't know how that compares to this current situation that you explained, that you feel encapsulated in a bubble. Of course, Slovakian publicity is very different to the Hungarian right now. How do you feel that these borders or these schisms inform your work? Or can you maybe draw on working for the Slovakian public broadcast for your work right now, working in Hungary, but in a very isolated sort of island in independent media?
The Slovakian media landscape is really differs from the Hungarian. For example, that in Hungary, the biggest advertiser is the state. I think it's unique everywhere. That is the way to found the media oligarch own media companies from the state budget, and it's not in Slovakia. But I work for the Hungarian department of the public service media of Slovakia. And because there are a lot of Hungarian minority community in neighboring countries, so the media consuming of the Hungarians abroad and in Hungary is almost the same. They use the Hungarian media as well, and it's a very important part of the Orban regime to use this virtual nation unity with the Hungarians abroad to export the client system in Hungary. And the Hungarian minority communities are becoming the part of the Hungarian regime as well. And sometimes I feel that when I work there, as I worked at home, there is a filter bubble for the Orban fans, and there is another filter bubble who is in the opposition.
Ece, you do point it out multiple times that you are only asked about your personal story, whereas your professional choice or your choice as a writer, as a journalist, is to tell the stories of others. So how do you access those others now that you say that your primary experience is being on your own? Or as you wrote in the article that the viewers can also read in Eurozine, titled "The Paper Pain," I am what I write. How do you approach others?
I trespass this boundary by telling them their stories. As they ask my story, I answer them with their own story, so that they know what we are going through in the world in several countries is exactly the same. Although György says that countries are different, which is true, what we are going through is exactly the same thing. We are witnessing the morbid symptoms of a collapsing regime, and one of the morbid symptoms is this Putin's of our age, or Netanyahu's of our age. We are all suffering from the same rising right-wing populism. or this new form of fascism. So I start telling their stories to them, and this is why I wrote How to Lose the Country, 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship. And in the beginning of that book, I actually told a story which tells a lot about this, telling them their story. I wrote another book before, How to Lose the Country, Turkey, Insane and Melancholy, and I was talking about that in London in Frontline Club. And I was telling about Turkey and how we suffer and, the oppression and so on. And then after I was finished, there was this one woman in the audience. She brought her hands together and with this, very compassionate voice, she asked me, "So what can we do for you?" And suddenly I felt like a baby panda that's going to be adopted via website. So I said, you know what? Actually, the question is, what can I do for you? And that, question and my answer created How to Lose the Country. Because Western, especially Western European countries, they have this illusion that they are immune to what we have faced in Russia or Hungary or in Italy or in Turkey. They think that these are crazy countries anyway. Anything can happen. They have all the reasons to explain why that happened in that country, not in their country, not in their own country. At least this was the case in 2016 when I started writing the book, and I published How to Lose the Country in 2019. And by the time my prophecies, so to speak, were coming true, Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister of England. Trump is still a specter that's haunting White House. And in Germany and in France, the center is barely holding, political center. So every country is going to taste this poisonous malaise of our age, this new form of fascism. So it's not easy to hear your story from a woman who has curly hair and who is talking this horrible English with this horrible accent. So they were thinking that, okay, this woman is like the Cassandra and there's nothing that we can, take seriously. And then it took me 2 years. And then after 2 years, in 2021, suddenly my book became very timely and super popular. Why? Because they finally believe that crazy countries have not been crazy in the beginning. It was this wave of new form of fascism that we experienced earlier than the Western European countries that made us look crazy. So how do I tell their stories? Although they ask about my story, only a very few people are truly interested in our stories. Otherwise, it's just a topic in one of those cocktail parties or 5 o'clock tea, subjects in Oxford University meetings. Otherwise, they do not follow what's happening in our countries. But I do follow theirs. I follow their countries very carefully and very closely. One of the things that is interesting about our countries, Hungary, Russia, and Turkey, they are not easily accessible. The psyche of the country, the zeitgeist in the country, the political status of the country, several other things. They're too complicated for a Westerner. Whereas we know their language and we can access easier. So actually, this is also a remedy for my against the fact that I am forced to tell my story only. It's just like a offensive way of I would say offensive, proactive way of being a writer in this situation, not to be confined to my own story or my country's story.
I don't know what to say. It is just quite sad, and I'm happy to hear that your book was popular. Isn't this a way to find a new audience and to find your new voice?
Yes, in a way, but then no, because I started writing in English. This is the thing I didn't say. I forgot to say that. I immigrated to another language as well. I haven't written in English until this book, the first time I wrote a book originally in another language. So yes, it is a way to find a new audience, but it is also a way, it's also a big compromise, because I've been professionally writing since I'm 19. I published more than a dozen of books in Turkish, novels, journalistic books, and so on. But then this time, when How to Lose a Country was out, I felt like, okay, this is not my book, because it's edited, it's in another language, it feels weird. I couldn't own the book until 2 years, until very recently, actually. And yeah, so it's a big compromise on a level, to protect my dignity on another level, because, you know, otherwise, if I kept on writing in Turkish, only in Turkish, I think my dignity would be damaged, would be kept damaged. This is a very long, personal, and quite deep matter, but it is not sad. There's nothing sad about my situation. If I'm making it sound sad, it's my mistake. There's nothing sad. It's good. I am still. I were, I am, and I will be.
My situation is completely different from you, because I wrote in English. All my books was written in English, even when I lived in Russia, because we didn't have a publisher in our country. Me and my co-author Andrei Soldatov, we didn't have publisher in Russia because people were afraid to publish such books like about the FSB, or about the Kremlin's wars on the internet, or political emigration. Most of them were killed by the Kremlin. And so we invented a way to publish our book on the West, and then in a year, or when some time passed, Russian publisher could publish a translation of the book that was already published in the West. And in this situation, they don't need to pay legal risks, because this is only a translation. This is not the real thing. So
but isn't that like the classic samizdat route? Like have it published abroad and then brought back into the country? That sounds exactly 1970s, right?
But back then they wrote their books in Russian.
That's true. Okay, you're right. You got me.
You need to rewrite them in Russian, in their native language once again, as we did.
Sure.
It's very complicated, but this is the way how to transfer your information to your audience in the country.
That is correct, and it is very ironic, and that is the sad part, actually. One, How to Lose a Country is not published in Turkey because of political reasons, but the new book will be published, my new book, and now I'm not going to translate, but somebody will translate me to my mother tongue, and it won't be my Turkish, and I will have to rewrite the entire translation, whereas I could have written it in Turkish in the first place, but then things work in a funny way nowadays. Yeah.
I don't know if you do teach or train or deal with young professionals, but I do know that György does and has for years and years. I do wonder what kind of advice you have for people starting in your professions, both in journalism and in literature, and what kind of perspective do you have for them? Do you think it's like a completely different generation who's going to find a catch, or is it a lost generation? How do you approach this?
Oh, I don't like to talk about generation differences, but if you read the media, so you read that. You can realize that it's a really different generation, but I think it's not depending on generation, because always, not always, but a lot of times thinking about what was our fault, that, I mean, the media, that our regime, mostly Hungary, could reach this situation, this authoritarian regime. So, and one of the faults of the media that we didn't realize that we are insisting insisting on the watchdog function of the media. Or the most of the people consume media for entertainment, and this is, I think, is much stronger than before, than 20 or 30 years ago, and we have no answer for it. Although most of our media contents has try to get as big reach as possible, so we didn't think about our gatekeeper role. And now we are running after our audience and try to get as many minutes from their time as possible. And it's a terrible way. But this new generation is socialized for this way of working, and it's not mine. And I think in the last, I have a lot of young colleagues, but formally I didn't teach in a university. So I finished it 2008, I think, and I can realize that the generation who came to the media department of Ece University, the biggest, most serious university in Hungary in human faculties, and more than the half never read any political contents, and it's a really it needs a really other role model than mine for the journalistic. So it's it's very different to realize, to accept that we are in a minority now, not because of the way of journalism, but in Hungary, because you can realize that you are a minority in the face of the freedom, and it's very difficult to accept this feeling that you are a minority, and your aim about committing to human rights and checks and balances and rule of law, it's not principles of the majority of the society, and it's a very difficult to live with this for me.
Right now, that's not the best moment to start a journalistic career in Russia. But I am sure that it will change soon. So for new generations, it's both. For on the one side, it's much easier to start your career, and it's also harder. It's easier because now you can find a lot of information on the internet, and you can get access to databases, and you can produce a really thrilling and great investigation, not having people's sources, which is always a problem. When you are 20 years old, people don't want to talk to you, and you have put a lot of efforts and spent many months or years getting in touch with, I don't know, real people who possess information. But now you not always need this. You can go on the internet, can pay a little for databases in Russia. You can get access even, I don't know, all kind of information about people, about their property, about where they live, where they go, what they use every day, even their bank accounts. So it's and it's amazing. So it's possibilities. You can became famous for, I don't know, for a few months. But on the other side, it's harder because it's not only happening in Russia, it's happening across the world. Journalism has much less money than it was in the 80s and in the 90s, when media was on the rise, and to get assignment on abroad to go to the war conflict, it's getting more and more difficult because lack of money, and that's where we journalists had our experience, our real experience. And so let's see what's happened. But I still see a lot of opportunities for young journalists. It's interesting job, and that's only advantages of this job. You have never been bored. You will never be bored.
What György said is resonated with me, because I've been through the harshest apprentice master relation when I got into journalism. For 3 years, they didn't even put my name on my stories. I was non-existent. So I came from that kind of tradition where they break you, then they reconstruct you. But now, to be a news person is to be somebody, because it's not like before, as György said, and we don't have institutions behind ourselves now, behind journalists. Journalists are one-man shows, or doing guerrilla tactics to survive and to make news. And it is also very embarrassing, shameful, if you come from the old tradition, to look for the audience, to beg the audience for another minute. But it is journalism as an institution is transforming. I think the young generation will do it differently, and more dedication will be required to do journalism. And I think only those who cannot not live without doing journalism will be journalists. It won't be a profession. It will be a commitment, I think. And this will make journalism a bit different than, our generation did it. Going to Sorbonne, which is very very important to me, because I went through the war zones as well as a journalist, but then there was the institution behind me. I knew that if something happened, they would take me with the whatever fucking helicopter or something. Now, freelance journalists do not have that. That's why I'm saying guerrilla tactics will be more prominent, not warfare guerrilla tactics, but in terms of doing journalism, guerrilla tactics will be more prominent, and journalism will require more commitment. So I think we're going to see some die-hard journalists in coming 10 years. They won't, and unfortunately, they will have to run for the audience in the first period when they start doing journalism. But then I think they will be characters in our lives, in our digital sphere, that we want to follow. So yeah, journalism is evolving towards something very interesting. I remember I was in Tahrir when Tahrir was happening, and also in Gezi in Turkey when the uprising was happening. And same thing happened in both places. People turned to people who were there. They went to Twitter for somehow they found the sources, like real people talking from from Tahrir or from Gezi. They didn't turn to big logos like New York Times or CNN International. They turned to people, as if human chose human, not the logo. So I think this attitude will determine the journalism in coming generation. And I'm not necessarily pessimistic, but György, you're right. It's not us. It's not us. It's different, because this generation is not embarrassed to advertise themselves. They are not embarrassed to sell stuff. They're not embarrassed to be inherently business people. And journalism was more like a vagabond, serious vagabond stuff when I was doing it. So yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Irina, you were talking about how you went through quarantine, haven't you?
Because quarantine in London was quite harsh, and we didn't have possibility to go anywhere. I mean, archives were closed, libraries were closed, editorial offices were closed. All my journalist friends, they worked from their homes, which is not very good situation for journalists. And we can meet people. We could meet people outside. And I made 100,000 walk along London, talking with people. That was quite new and interesting experience because, you know, in Moscow, we don't walk at all. We just meet each other and get into the cafe or anywhere to have coffee, to have fun, and walking. Given because we have a terrible weather for like 9 months a year, we are not walking. We don't like walking. So here, I have been walking a lot, and I got a lot of information from people walking. I don't know, and I got used to eat standing, and so it was all new experience. But I'm happy that now we can get back to the normal life and meet people physically and doing things offline, because Zoom, it's helpful in terms of gathering information, but it does not work like physical contact works. So I'm happy to get back to normal life. I did not get a lot of positive experience from lockdown. No, I can say so.
Ece, you have said that you your main contact in Zagreb is Mika Buljevic, head of
Yes.
Buksa there, and our board member at Eurozine. But otherwise, you're pretty isolated. How does it work out for you? What have you changed?
I'm famous for my extreme self-discipline, but then, and I survived pandemic thanks to that. But then now it's taking its toll on me. And finally, in 2 years, I had the first in-person event with limited number of people, but still in-person event. And I was quite stupid actually, because I really wanted to hug everyone in the audience and kiss them and like, thank you for coming. It was like, I realized actually, being a very asocial person normally, I realized that I need the people, even those people I don't know. I think this was quite groundbreaking for me, because I'm not known for my extreme sociability, to say the least. So yeah, I need people, and this is huge for me.
Gyuri, you had a very intense pandemic experience. You launched a print daily like a week before the first lockdown, which then basically killed the paper, as much as I understand. And now you're working with Radio Free Europe. You said you're back in the editorial room and you're loving it. You love doing the sort of day-to-day work of a journalist that you haven't done as an editor-in-chief in this sense.
It's a very practical knowledge to teach the young colleagues and to show them, see the media in a part of a big one. As an industrial, as a political actor, as an ethical one, but I don't want to change anything. What was a big surprise for me that after the pandemic, I think nothing will change, and it's so our leaders, Erdogan, Putin, and Orban, are the great players of the political manipulations, and the pandemic and the lockdown I know quite well Orban's political practice that is flourished. So there was a terrible situation for all the community. And dividing became strengthened, became the borders between the political camps, political and cultural camps, became taller and tougher during the pandemic. So it was a very, I think everything will go on in the same way, and I'm not so enthusiastic because of this.
Now we switch from this conversation to the live questions and answers. The speakers are going to react to your comments you have already written below the stream. And our colleague Sarah Vering, our editor, has something that she has to ask.
My question actually ultimately can be for all of you, but I'll start by mentioning something you spoke about, Ece. You recounted this moment when you were on the border, and that terrifying moment when you thought your passport might be taken away from you, and you ended up being involved in a selfie moment. And it seems to me that experience was where you feared for your personal safety. Your freedom of movement could have been taken away from you in that pivotal moment. So what I wanted to ask were, once you've reached that point, and it will be the same for you, Irina, when you have to move to London for your personal safety, what are the professional or even personal coping mechanisms that you employ? What for younger journalists out there, those diehards that we're going to need, what can you suggest to them as your means of coping?
There is nothing that I can advise the young journalists, and I hope nobody will go through that. Only coping mechanism was to freeze my emotions for about 3 years, because emotions get in the way when you're trying to survive. But then I realized that I developed a survival morality of survival, and that morality is not a very convenient morality to embrace your own fragility. I'm sorry if I am being too emotional when I'm answering this, but that process is an emotional process as well, because you're also dealing with the feeling of guilt, because many of your friends, fellow citizens, are in the country still, and you're leaving. So in order to deal with the personal emotions, I think the best thing is to stop the emotions for a while. We have been in this new age where emotions have been overrated. Everybody speaks about their emotions. During that time when I put my emotions in deep freeze, I realized that they have been really overrated, and there are actually, the abundance of emotions or expressions of emotions have concealed the fact that we also have ideas and goals and things to do and so on. So this is the only thing I can advise. Don't feel that much.
Okay, but then you're saying that this deep freeze is useful somehow, or maybe you're thinking about another mode of approaching this. So maybe not freezing them, but not thinking that that's all there is. Or how would you suggest we go about this?
First of all, neither Irina nor me are the first people who are experiencing such a thing. So what I did, especially first year when I was in Zagreb, I read a lot about those people who had to leave their countries and how they dealt with it. From Hannah Arendt to South African writers, several other exiles and so on. And I found people like me who found the word exile too much, too big of a burden to carry. And I followed, I searched for what they did. By the way, I'm hearing my voice, that's why it's a bit confusing. Yeah, but, to go back in history and to see what people have done to survive this kind of situation is a great guidance, so to speak.
It was an uneasy question because the situation I found out myself in London was unexpected to me, because I have never meant to leave Russia and to immigrate from Russia. So I wasn't prepared. And because it was a COVID isolation period for 6 months, it also wasn't very helpful. But at the same time, because I already had a proposal for the new book, and I did all research for this book that I could do in Russia, and I finished the research that I had to do in Russia. So it was nothing that I can find in Russia for the book. So I continue my research here in London, but it was not easy because archives archives were closed for 6 months. Libraries were closed for 6 months. Everybody can meet people only online. But I tried to continue to maintain giving interviews, asking people questions, and gathering information. That was my way to survive. I think for us as journalists, the only way to survive everywhere is to continue our work.
Yeah, thank you. I also see that we have a question coming in the comments, asking György, Freunde Thaler is asking György, you mentioned that most Hungarians no longer believe in freedom, democracy, etc. Can you talk a little about what, if anything, they do believe? Have they lost all their principles?
So I'm not a political scientist or a social psychologist, but according to comparative European values studies, the Hungarian is the most individualistic nation in Europe. So the Hungarians are always looking for the private, the solving the problems in a private way, not with cooperative way. And in the last some years, when this strict anti-refugee political campaign started, it became worse and worse. So I think the most individualistic and it's very important for the Hungarians, again, according to this surveys, the safety, and this is which is very perfect for Orban, because he always save from everything, from the migrants, from Brussels, from everybody. You know, this kind of populist leaders, this is the typical agenda, and that's what I know that this is very important for the Hungarians, and I think to get the freedom in 1989 and 90, it wasn't a common feeling for the society. It was a kind of discussion between the elites, the new elite and the communist elites. There wasn't big demonstrations, or very few one, not like in Germany or in Romania where the revolution were. So this feeling, it's very important that we have now that feeling that we got the freedom and we reached the freedom. And there is and the other thing that the most important was that in the 90s for the Hungarians to be a member of the European Union because of the way of level. So that material way, and of course the traveling possibilities as a worker, and that was the important, and not these values which could be the basic of the European Union.
I also will be extremely selfish and use this opportunity for just a little bit of, well, in a sense, self-advertising. In Eurozine, you will find an article that was actually written for New Eastern Europe, titled "A Country of Grumblers," which is a short review of value research about Hungarians, which are rumored to be the most pessimistic country. So all the Hungarian sociologists weep about Hungarians being so gloomy. contradiction in terms. But beside a country of grumblers, which I hope my colleagues maybe can put the link on the screen, there is a question which I think will be interesting both for Ece and Irina, and this is from Annie from Ordu Bild in Gothenburg. She's asking, what would you, all reporting from and on the south and east parts of Europe, say to or about the public sphere and journalism in the northwest? How are we connected and what should we expect? Are we supposed to expect a similar new fascist development?
I mean, that I'm not a specialist on South and Eastern Europe, so I can give an expert opinion on these issues, because what I see as an average reader or an average person, what's going on in this direction and between the Eastern and Southern Europe is a very sad process of when people are getting more and more right wing, and that's of course a pity. And the same thing had been happening in Russia for many years. Like 10 or maybe 15 years. People started in Russia. People started in the 90s. They adopted a very democratic and advanced view on the world, and after that they wanted to be international, they wanted to be global, they wanted to be democratic, and after then went through some difficult economic period, and when a lot of people got very poor, they shifted their opinion and they started more and more right wing. So they started being nationalistic. That started being they started concentrating, focusing on their own country and on their own purposes. They ethnic division also became very present in Russia, and the same I think the same is happening in Europe, and that's a very sad process. And there are a lot of similarities between countries.
Well, my main argument is that there is a global pattern among the countries, so it doesn't matter if it's south, east, or northwest. I do think that this new form of fascism is actually inherent in the neoliberal system, and that the main contract of capitalism has actually damaged the main contract of democracy. That is why we are witnessing this, extreme right wing, rise of extreme right wing. So no country is immune. And especially the most, so-called most mature democracies, such as England, Britain, or United States, they are already witnessing this wave of right-wing populism or new form of fascism. That is why I do think that this is a global matter. Therefore, it calls for a global answer. That's why it calls for a global solidarity among the people like us. It is coming from the fact that we are witnessing a collapse of a system. That is why the morbid symptoms, as Gramsci once said, are arising. They're becoming more visible. Money laundering, the mafiosa type of entities within the government or in collaboration with governments, and right-wing populism. All these things are not specific to those countries that were supposed to be, weak democracies. So that is why actually we should be careful about the first symptoms of it. And the first symptoms is always this promising greatness by right-wing populists, or disturbing the political sphere and political narrative, and so on and so forth. So there are global patterns, and every country is witnessing it, witnessing this new form of fascism on different levels, in different ways. But the main morbid symptom is the same. We are witnessing a collapse, and this is why it's happening.
Yeah, thank you, Ece, and I believe we're already sort of abusing your time, so we will let you go for now.
I'm so sorry. I would love to stay. Thank
No,
you.
no, never mind. It's this is the thing with online calls. Most of our British contributors log on an hour late because we give time in Central European time, and in Central Europe we're supposed to be a little bit late in arriving and a little bit early in leaving. That's just how it goes. Thank you so much, Ece Temelkuran, for joining us from Zagreb.
Bye,
And
everyone.
I do have a question for Irina and György, which is a little bit also more into the psyche of a media worker. I understand that neither of you really likes to talk about yourselves, and I respect that. We all respect that. Nevertheless, there's a bunch of editors and journalists over here and in Berlin and in Wrocław, and probably also watching the stream. Hence the question, which Mika Bujevic, head of Buksa from Zagreb, is asking you. I was wondering if any of you could count on solidarity from your colleagues, whether in your own countries or internationally, and in what form this solidarity was expressed. Maybe this can be first addressed to Irina, who, in a reverse form, I guess, what happened with Projekt, the raids on the well, I guess the homes and not even the offices of the journalists of the Russian outlet Projekt, who were promising to publish the results of a big investigation, just happened this week. Hard drives and all sorts of equipment confiscated, also phones and stuff. So I guess that also calls for a response from you, at least personally, but also collegially. What is your connection? Can you support your colleagues in a similar situation? Do you get support from your colleagues? Who can you count on to cope personally?
Yes. I can rely on these people, and these people can rely on me. Roman Badanin, I have to explain that Roman Badanin is a chief editor-in-chief of investigative website called Projekt, which means project. And recently his home was searched, and his home was searched, and he was accused in libel against one businessman. But his investigation, his and his colleagues' investigation which caused all these problems. But frankly speaking, they published a lot of very, very sensitive investigations into Russian officials, top officials, and security services corruption. And the last one was was investigation into enormous wealth of the Russian Interior Minister Kolokoltsev. And it was published despite what's happened. And the situation in Russia is that liberal, independent, and a democratic journalists, there are not a lot of us. It's like maybe 5 or 3% of all journalists in the country. So we all know in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, at least, we all know each other. We closely, to some extent, we cooperate with each other. We support each other. We know, we follow news about each other. We advise each other we give advice each other on issues, such issues like security and investigations, information gathering. So there is a close community, and we all know each other. So there is no problem between us. There is a solidarity, but the problem is that we can do a lot for each other because we are not in the strongest position right now. So we have to continue our job and our investigations, and everybody try to do this, try to do the best. And we believe in each other, we trust each other. Yes, that's a good thing.
Yeah, thank you. György Kerényi, I think you have your own experience, and you also know a lot about the experience of Hungarian journalists in the recent years, I believe, with outlets being closed down from one day to another, and colleagues trying to help each other out. How do you say that solidarity is very foreign from sort of like the initial cultural reflex or the zeitgeist that you sense in Hungary? Do you still see solidarity among colleagues? And how does that manifest? Can you count on someone to care for you?
I'm really sorry that is so negative today. But I have a lot of problem with this solidarity. There is so there are a lot of examples for this. For example, the first when it happened with me as well. If you are a leader of a so-called independent medium, and you can feel the hand of the power, you can feel that the Fidesz is closing, using the owner for this, and in that time I always quit in the first or the second minute of this. But you always find somebody from the staff who is sitting in your chair. It's not happening with me only, it's happening everywhere. So, and they are independent, and after 1 or 2 years, it became the part of the Fidesz media empire. And the other that if one medium have to be closed, for example, Népszabadság, it was the biggest daily in Hungary, or the last happening was the biggest online platform. It couldn't close, but it's really changed for a ruling party direction, and all of the editorial staff, 70 or 80%, quit in one moment, and they launched a new medium called Telex. So I saw that the other important big media companies, of course, they said they are they have solidarity with Index, but they were very, very glad to get the audience of the biggest Hungarian online platform. It's very important in that kind of business model, which is not crowdfunding, which is not paywall, which is the classical viewing commercial ads. And I saw that these companies, the competitors are deeply glad that Index is over now.
You don't have to excuse for yourself for being negative. We're Hungarians after all. I mean, György Kerényi is going to be so happy about this. But beside that almost silly but not quite so silly joke, we have Peter Kreko here, who is on a sort of intellectual retreat here in Vienna, and he has one comment to add. Peter Kreko is head of Political Capital, a think tank in Hungary, come on over, and also a recurring author of Eurozine.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for this brilliant discussion. I could only, listen to the second part, but I think it is really substantial, and I'm listening to many bullshitting, Zoom meetings and discussions these days, and it is really refreshing. I would just have one comment and curious on what you think about that, is that I think one reason for what György has just described is a kind of fatigue of emotions, fatigue of anger, fatigue of being in outrage because of what surrounds us, and solidarity fatigue as well. I mean, there are, I think, probably two options. Either you stay and you have to live with that, and Ece has just told that you have to freeze your emotions. It also means that you can't always feel solidarity towards everyone. You have to stop your emotions, or you leave, and then it's a different kind of game. But I mean, the big question for me here is that how to keep up the level of solidarity, the level of justified anger and outrage.
Russia is a vibrant country, and since last year, when Putin pronounced himself a president for another 16 years, the situation has changed a lot, because before that, a lot of people tried to survive by their own and to survive themselves and their family individually. I mean, liberal people. I am not talking about the 60 or 70% of Russian population. But after after all opportunities to elect the new president as a new figure was cancelled, people to some kind, they refused this conception to try to survive individually, and they started acting more collectively, because there is no way out right now from the situation until at least Putin won't go out, will leave the position. There is no way to survive individually. So people got more solidar, and people got more united, to my understanding. So, and in terms of the internet, the Russian internet also getting there are a lot of tools how you can organize protests and action in support of some kind of oppressed people on the internet, and all these options are still on the internet. So people using this every day. A lot of money. Last week, one liberal journalist got himself in a very difficult situation, personal situation. It was not connected with political situation, but as well. And he asked to gather money for him, and he literally gathered, like, he collected more than $25,000 for a few hours. Medusa, which is the most popular liberal media in the country, a website, was labeled as a foreign agents recently, and it means that they were. It means that advertisers pull out most of advertisement from the website, and then they started collecting money public on the internet, and they got money for the next 2 months. So it's amazing results. For a few days they got money for the next few months. This is amazing, because like 5 years ago we could not expect anything like that.
That's maybe a very hopeful note to sort of end on, and that also reminds me of what Lukáš Fila, the managing director of Genik and the Slovakian news portal, had to say on our November program, which I'm hoping that my colleagues will pull up and post here in the show notes and also on the screen. This discussion was titled Journalism Under Pressure. It's not a very different title, although a little bit different of a situation, where he said that probably it's time that one can count more on the readers than they used to, that media can rely on their audience more than they traditionally have during the early times of the internet. Anyway, I really want to thank you for being here with us, and also during the rest of the discussion, Irina Borogan from London and György Kerényi from Budapest, all of us here joining from Vienna, from Wrocław, Berlin, and fully online. Thank you for your attention. There are some questions in the comment section left unanswered, but they can still be debated, and they can perpetually be debated in the comment section on Facebook and under the YouTube stream. And with this, we resume the 31st European Meeting of Cultural Journalists. Thank you for your attention, and good night. The barbecue is on, so we really got to go.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to this discussion, the conversation that resumed the 31st European Meeting of Cultural Journals, a hybrid event held in 3 parts from November of 2020 until July of 2021. You can find all other conversations from the event and articles of the authors speaking here in Eurozine under the hashtag EMCJ31. You can also subscribe to Eurozine's newsletter so you'll always know what's worth thinking about. For more stimulating discussions with authors and editors from throughout Europe and beyond, you can follow Gagarin, the Eurozine podcast. You'll find links in the description. We hope you've enjoyed the program. This event was co-founded by the Creative Europe program of the European Union, the National Endowment for Democracy, the Austrian Federal Ministry for Arts, Culture, Civil Service and Sport, and the city of Vienna. Our partners for the conference were the Polish journal New Eastern Europe and the German journal Blätter für Deutsche und Internationale Politik, as well as ELTA Media and the Center for Media, Data and Society of the CEU Democracy Center. Our media partners have been Partisan and Klub Radio.